Alright, today we're talking about juggles in Street Fighter 6. So I think longtime Street Fighter players kind of innately understand how juggles work in this series, but after seeing like Tekken players trying to pick up Street Fighter in the Sejam Slam, I realized that this game's juggling system is pretty unintuitive. So I'm going to try and give you guys today a technical breakdown of exactly how juggles work in Street Fighter 6, like what goes on behind the scenes to make a juggle possible or not work, that kind of stuff. It's worth mentioning that even to this very day, this stuff is very poorly documented. So right now I'm using data from FAT, which I'll show you right here. So this is kind of the M. Bison OD Scissor Kick breakdown page, and you can see down here we do have juggle data for this move, but even on FAT, lots of this data is missing. A lot of characters don't have it. I've checked a few other resources, and quite a few are either completely missing juggle data or only have a small amount. So yeah, I can understand why this information is so poorly understood, because there's no way of knowing this stuff in game. I should say that there is no in-game resource anywhere in the overlay which will tell you this stuff. So yeah, I really think this is a thing that Capcom in the future should add to the training mode. They should actually show juggle data in the overlay. But for now, I'm just gonna have to give you a quick rundown of how this all works. So juggles in Street Fighter 6 operate using 4 important numbers. There's the juggle count, juggle start, juggle increase, and juggle limit. Now, what the hell does that all mean? So juggle count, you'll notice the juggle count is the only one that's missing from this segment. So juggle count is just a count that increases the longer a juggle goes on. So one thing to just mention up front is that juggle count starts from 0, not 1. So a juggle count of 0 is unique because literally anything can juggle afterwards. So a common example of a juggle count 0 situation, for example, is if you start a juggle with a drive rush normal against an airborne opponent. So if I just show that real quick. So if I just do a drive rush jab here, you'll notice that literally anything will juggle afterwards. Whether it's just a normal or a special move, everything works. This is an example of a juggle count 0 scenario. So this is kind of a unique special case. That's why I'm mentioning it up front. So literally anything will combo here off juggle count 0. But that's kind of a unique scenario. Let's cover the more common stuff. Okay, so to understand the higher juggle counts after 0, we have to first talk about juggle start and juggle increase. These two values here attached to a move. Okay, so juggle start is a number representing the starting juggle count if this move is what begins the juggle. So for example, Bison's EX Scissors, which we're looking at right here, has a juggle start of 3. Ignore the first 2. That's just the first 2 hits of the EX Scissors. The one we care about is the last one, because the last hit is what launches. You'll notice that the EX Scissors has 3 hits, but it's only the 3rd hit that launches. And as we can see here in the juggle data on FAT, the juggle start is 3. So this is where juggle limit comes in. So juggle limit, on the other hand, is a number that will determine if a move can successfully combo in a juggle. So if the juggle limit is equal to or greater than the current juggle count, then it can be used to continue the juggle. So let's use an example here, because I don't want to get too caught up in talking about numbers. Let me use an actual example. So let's do a simple juggle. We're gonna go from Bison's EX Scissors into his heavy punch swipe. So we can see here that his EX Scissors has a juggle start of 3, and his heavy punch psycho swipe over here has a juggle limit of 10. So because the juggle limit is greater than the current juggle start value on the juggle count, this will work. So yeah, so the EX Scissors here is launching them into a juggle. And then this can connect successfully afterwards because it's within the juggle limit. That's why that works. And now conversely, let's look at an example that doesn't work. We'll use EX Scissors a second time. So you can see here, the juggle start for EX Scissors is 3. The juggle limit is only 2. And because the juggle limit here is less than where the juggle count would be at 3, that means that from this data alone, you can conclude that EX Scissor Kick will not juggle into itself because 2 is too low. So that's why this juggle doesn't work. Because the second Scissors has a too low juggle limit. Okay, so that's the very basic concept of it. That gives you an idea of like what will juggle into what else. Now let's introduce a little bit more complexity to it. So the first thing we should talk about is drive rush. So any normal performed out of a drive rush will gain +3 to its juggle limit. So for example, normally Bison's crouching medium punch has a juggle limit of 0. This will only juggle if the juggle count is 0, which is almost never. So this is almost never something that you can juggle into. However, if you perform it out of a drive rush, it gains +3 to the juggle limit. And so let's give an example of that. So again, using EX scissors, you'll notice the EX scissors does not juggle into crouch medium punch. However, if you drive rush crouch medium punch, this does work because the drive rush increases the juggle limit. So that's the first important property of drive rush. The second important property of drive rush is that it causes normals to have their juggle start and juggle increase values both set to 0. So effectively what this means is that if you put a drive rush normal in the middle of a juggle at any point, the juggle state before and after the drive rush are exactly the same. So what I mean by that, for example, is that functionally these two combos are identical. Combo number 1 and combo number 2. So the only difference between those two combos is that I stuck a drive rush crouch heavy punch in between, but because the juggle increase and the juggle start are both 0, it made no difference to the overall juggle state. You can effectively ignore drive rush normals when you're trying to calculate will this affect the overall juggle state. There's also some caveats to this system that can make it a little more complicated in a few character specific ways. So for example, one off the top of my head is that multi-hitting moves sometimes have different juggle limits on each individual hit of the move. It won't just be a universal value across the entire move. It might be individual unique values for each hit. So let me give you guys an example real quick. So if we look at this example here, Jamie's standing heavy punch is a 3-hit normal, but if performed in a juggle after EX palm, it only hits twice. So the second hit is actually not connecting here because it doesn't have a high enough juggle limit to continue the combo here. So you only get 2 hits of the stand fist. And there's lots of characters where sometimes maybe like 1 hit of a multi-hitting DP might drop, that kind of thing. That's usually why, because different parts of the special or different parts of the normal will have slightly different juggle limits on each hit. Okay, another example of a situation to know about is the force knockdown state, which is a juggle that comes in this game when you hit the opponent out of certain airborne moves. So for example, we're going to use Dalsim's float as the main example here. So for example, if I hit Dalsim out of this with an air-to-air, he will be sent into a juggle state, but keep in mind that will be juggle count 1, not juggle count 0. So I can't go into a normal here. Stand heavy punch will whiff, but I can go into specials. Like that. Okay, another thing to know is that some moves can actually have a juggle increase set to 0. So an example of this is DJ's target combo. So this target combo right here, medium punch, the second hit of this target combo actually adds +0 to the juggle increase. And that's why you may have seen this combo before. This is probably a combo you've seen if you've played this game a bit. It looks a bit silly. Something like that. So what's happening here is that the first medium punch, as I mentioned earlier, because this is coming out of a drive rush, it like naturally adds 0 to the juggle count. And as I said earlier, the second hit also has a 0 juggle increase. So doing this target combo over and over again never actually adds anything to the juggle count. It just stays at +0 each time. And that's why you can keep doing this target combo infinitely as long as you have drive gauge. So don't assume that things automatically add at least 1 to the juggle count. Sometimes they can add 0. Okay, so while we're talking about edge cases, there are also a small number of moves in this game which can have different juggle data depending on which of the active frames of the move hit. So, let me explain what the hell that means. Zangief's Lariat is one such move. Zangief spins around a bunch of times, If this hits on the first, I think the first 2 spins, you don't get a juggle afterwards. There is no way to juggle after Lariat, even if you could. Like, he's stuck spinning, but let me just force a trade to show you this. There we go. So you'll notice that after trading with the Lariat, the stand medium kick will not juggle. However, the juggle start of Lariat actually changes on the final spin. So if you connect with only the final spin of Lariat, the juggle start is actually set to 0. And that allows you to do stuff like this. So yeah, that's a big part of Zangief's stun combos, and that's the explanation for... You're probably wondering like why that juggle even works. And like I said, it's because the juggle start is actually different depending on which spin of the Lariat connects. So there are a lot of weird character-specific like exceptions to the rules as that you might naturally understand. Okay, so the last exception I want to talk about is there's actually a couple moves in this game that can reduce the juggle count back to 0. So I said earlier, there are some moves that add 0 to the juggle count. Even more rare than that, there are moves that can actually revert the juggle count back to 0. So the only 2 examples I know of are Jamie's level 3 and Aki's Toxic Blossom EX Serpent Lash hitting on an airborne opponent. I know, don't ask me to explain that one, but it's an important part of their kit. So for example, with Jamie, you can do a long juggle into level 3. So at this point, we do the level 3, and this actually resets the juggle state back to 0, which allows you to do stuff like this. So normally, you'd never be able to get a stand jab that far into a juggle. But because it's back to 0 after level 3, we do Drive Rush Crouch Fierce, which as I mentioned earlier, Drive Rush also adds 0 to the juggle count. So that means the level 3 sets it back to 0, the Drive Rush Crouch Fierce keeps it at 0, and that allows us to reset into stand jab. But as I said, these are pretty rare exceptions. So I guess just to finish up, I'll do like an ordinary Bison BMB, and then I'll break it down in terms of the actual juggle count numbers behind it. So if we do a combo like this, something like that you've probably seen a million times before. Let's look at the actual numbers behind it. So the first juggle starter is EX Scissors, which as I said earlier, has a juggle start of 3. We follow it up by doing a Drive Rush Stand Medium Punch, which would normally have a juggle limit of 0. But because we're drive rushing it, it gains the +3. So it goes from having a 0 juggle limit to a 3 juggle limit, which allows it to combo after this. We then go into the overhead target combo, which as you can see here, the second hit of the target combo has a juggle limit of 10, which is actually quite high. So we're currently at juggle count 3, and that's why 10 is still well within the limit to continue comboing, so that's why the overhead still connects. This also has a juggle increase of 1, so our juggle count will now be 4. So at this point in the combo, the juggle count is at 4. We then want to go into Light Bomb. That move, which as we can see here, also has a juggle limit of 10. And again, we're only at 4, so we've got plenty of room for maneuver here. We're still well within the juggle limit. We also see here, the juggle increase on the Psycho Swipe is 1 and 1 for each individual hit because it's a multi-hitting move. So that means the juggle count goes from 4 to 6. And then finally, if we want to tack on the level 3 at the end, we can see that Bison's level 3 actually has a juggle limit of 99. Now this is very common in this game. Most supers in this game, not all, but most supers have extremely high juggle limits. The idea being that theoretically, you should always be able to put a super at the end of a combo, especially a level 3. Like, this is not universal, but usually the juggle limit for supers is far, far higher than you would normally need to be at this point. So our juggle count is, I believe, at 6, did I say, I think? And that's well within the 99 limit, so the level 3 connects in full. And that's how that combo works in terms of the juggle system. So I know that's how the juggles work in this game. I know it's a bit crazy. I know it's like not explained well in the game anywhere. I know it's weird to think about juggle increases and counts and starts, and it probably all sounds like gibberish, but hopefully this was a bit useful. gives you a bit more of an idea of like how this works in terms of like what's going on behind the scenes, what the game engine is doing to figure out if a juggle works or not. So yeah, if you thought this was helpful, let me know down in the comments, and I will catch you guys all in the next video.